Welcome to the Voice of San Diego podcast, where we make sense of local politics, schools, housing, public safety, the civic issues that impact the life of a San Diego resident. We break it down so you can understand it and make educated decisions.
Everything that goes into our investigative reporting, the journalists, public records requests, the data crunching, and this very show depends on the support of people like you because we're a nonprofit news organization. Enjoy the show.
Okay, we fired up the Great Voice San Diego podcast studio for a special episode of the Voice of San Diego podcast because we had a special guest today. It was Assistant Chief Dave Nisleit. He is appointed the new Chief of Police for the city of San Diego, and he, like all stars in the city, had to come make an appearance. We're like the Jimmy Kimmel of local politics, in that arena, right?
I wish there was a clean term like mayor-elect. You've got the month chief between the chief appoint or something. Yeah. Anyway, but yeah, he will, pending something very very much unforeseen, will be the next police chief.
Yeah, right. I mean, he was the announcement of his selection was it was accompanied by Myrtle Cole, the council president, which would indicate at least one Democrat support for this, and that's about all she
actually wasn't there, though.
She wasn't?
She was announced in the press release to be there.
Oh, okay.
But there was a last-minute change of plans. She couldn't make it. But, yeah, she
supports him, sounds like, right?
Right.
So we talked to him, asked him about everything we could come up with, and some things that people from the podcast group on Facebook also came up with, where they suggested some topics and helped us come up with some ideas.
Yeah, good solid suggestions there. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. So let's just jump right in and hear what he has to say. We are joined in the Great Voice San Diego podcast studio by Assistant Chief Dave Nisleit. He is the appointed chief that Mayor Kevin Faulconer has put forward for the City Council's approval for Chief of Police of the City of San Diego. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
And congratulations.
Thank you.
I appreciate you taking the time to come in. It'll mean a lot to probably the most engaged and powerful group of podcast listeners in San Diego. So thanks for coming in.
Absolutely.
So tell us a little bit about yourself. Your family has been in law enforcement for a long time and in San Diego, right?
Yeah, so I was born and raised here in San Diego. Grew up in the Rolando area. Went to high school at the Helix High School. Married, three wonderful adult kids. My son Ryan's on the police department. But I followed my father's footsteps. My dad retired in 1999 as a captain. And now here I am 30 years later, just getting named to be the next chief of police. And, I've grown up in this city. I have a very vested interest in this city and making the city even better. It's a great city. And I really look forward to this challenge and working with everybody throughout the community.
What are the traits of a police family? Is it a really regimented experience, or is there some rebellion that happens?
With my father and Pops, I hope you won't kill me on this one. He was a practical joker. So, growing up with my dad, he's a practical joker, but there's that switch when he goes to work, and it's about doing business. But, my father worked primarily out in southeastern San Diego and had great relationships. And so I just remember from a kid going on ride-alongs with my father, going to police events with my father, and police officers coming over to our house. So I literally grew up knowing police officers on the department. I played softball on the police department's team out in southeastern San Diego as a high school kid. And it's kind of a family business. It's a joke, I say, but there's a lot of truth to it. And even my uncle was a police officer in the state of Wisconsin.
So let's talk about the state of the department. So there's a lot of love for Shelley Zimmerman around town. She's the outgoing chief. People are bummed out that she's leaving, but there's also this sort of undercurrent that they can't protect and retain officers, and they can't recruit new ones. And City Councilman David Alvarez had a quote this week that was pretty harsh, where he was saying that was a management problem. It wasn't a money problem. It wasn't these other problems that have been talked about, but actually that there was some sort of core morale problem. And I've heard, in past discussions about infrastructure, equipment, just these sorts of things. Is there some sort of rod at the core like that?
No. I look at morale and being the patrol chief, the current patrol chief. So I have 1,150 of the current 1,800. And I go to all the commands, there's 9 patrol commands spread out through all the city and talk to officers all the time. And, morale is very good. Yes, we could get better equipment. And it's something that we are currently working on, both within the city and the San Diego Police Foundation and different groups that are really helping us get additional equipment. This pay package that goes into effect here July 1, that's a game changer. It truly is. That was the biggest crux of what was ailing us, was we were not competitive. In fact, I think we were 19 out of 19 in the region. And so that's going to change come July 1. And, I'm looking forward to, that's priority 1 for me, is restaffing this police department. We're over 200 positions, voided right now. We need to fill those vacancies. And so with this new competitive pay package, we're going to be out. We've hired a marketing firm, and that's going through the process of getting them on board. And then we're just going to be out hitting the streets, because I want to bring in the very best and brightest men and women from throughout this city. My thought is, if I hire people that grew up in the city, they're going to have a vested interest in making this the safest large city in the nation. And so that's goal 1. And then we'll continue looking at the equipment. We'll continue looking at facilities, and we'll make improvements in increments as we go through.
There was there's been some stray quotes here and there, people saying that we're already seeing results from the competitive pay increases. Are you seeing those? And specifically, what is it that makes you think that we're starting to see that the pay change has mattered?
So we have an academy that starts March 2nd. Mm-hmm. And that will be the first academy that was really recruited during this time where the new pay package was known, right? So we're going to have a very large academy. I think we're looking at right now mid-40s. My goal would be to get to 50.
And some of the most recent ones have been more in like the 25 range,
21,
yeah,
low 30s. So yeah, we're seeing huge increment steps up there. But the other thing is we're seeing officers who left returning. And we just had 2 a couple weeks ago that came back, and we've had a couple others, and have another one, I believe, in the process of returning. And so you're seeing homegrown talent that left because they were having problem making their mortgage or making car payments. Now with this new competitive pay package, they're coming back. And so we're going to do that. I have permission to also offer signing bonuses to attract laterals. And so that's going to be another thing that you will see us roll out here very quickly. Is again, it's about attracting the very best and brightest and bringing them into the city. And that's what my goal is going to be.
We have a Facebook group where our podcast listeners suggest questions, and we let them know that you were coming in. And one of them highlighted an interview you did with KPBS the other day, and you said you were talking about this problem about recruiting and retaining, mm-hmm. and sort of filling that big gap. And you said the main problem was that the pool for applicants for law enforcement, not just in San Diego, but for all law enforcement, has definitely shrunk. And you highlighted a few reasons for that. One is that the unemployment rate is low,
yeah,
and so people aren't looking for as many jobs. But the other thing you said that really stuck out is you said, quote, and I transcribed this just to be sure, the national dialogue about law enforcement, it has become an even more dangerous job over the last couple of years. More officers are being killed as we speak. And so that sort of jarred me, and I wanted to look that up. And from the stats of 2017, it looks like 2017 was down from the year before as far as officer deaths at 128, and much lower than some of the peaks in 2001 mm-hmm. and in 1974. What did you mean by that?
Just meaning that it's getting national attention. Matter of fact, an officer in Colorado Springs was killed yesterday, and 2 mm-hmm. officers were shot. And so it's just there's more attention to it. I'm not blaming the media on this at all. It's true that the applicant pool for all law enforcement, not just the city of San Diego, has shrunk, and mm-hmm. there's a lot of variables for that. That's just a very small piece of it. Cost of living in San Diego is another piece of that, and then the unemployment rate, and then there's a lot of pressure from loved ones of not to get into this profession. It is at times can be a very dangerous profession. So I didn't mean that more officers are being killed. It's just we're having officers killed, and it's I just think it gets more attention than years past.
So it's not that the movement or the oversight of officers or the movement of accountability of officers is causing more officers to be killed. You weren't trying to communicate that.
Not what
it's just that the attention. So this is something I wanted to talk about because it feels like we just got the news that crime rates in San Diego were at this historic low, right? It was just this, and it's beautiful to see. Congratulations to everybody in the department, and I think everybody's excited about that. But on the other hand, you turn on the news every night, and there's a murder or there's a awful invasion or something, and it's just it's like a constant stream. That stream hasn't changed, and so what you're kind of saying is that like the attention on the encounters that officers and people are having has reached a new peak that might be causing a problem in perception for that issue, right?
Yes, and I talked to applicants, I talked to officers that have joined the academy and then decided this is not for them, and they cite that some of it's just pressure from loved ones that they're worried about. I mean, I have a son now that is on this department, and it was something that I went through. I mean, it's a different job than when I came on in the late 80s, and so my son is here. I'm glad he's here, and he's here for all the right reasons. But yeah, it just seems to be, you turn on the daily news or you look at a newspaper and there's something about, some officer being hurt somewhere or some heinous crime, some murders. I mean, not too long ago, we had a serial killer here in San Diego ourselves.
Do you think it's a dangerous job?
At times, it can be a very dangerous job, yes.
Do you worry about your son?
Of course I do. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we can all appreciate that. When it comes to combating that, what can we all do to both keep in perspective the relative danger of it and to make sure we don't overplay that in the media, but also to, make that connection that I think gets highlighted a lot, that maybe we don't understand how dangerous it is. So we should understand how dangerous it is, but also not overplay it.
Yeah, it's a tough thing. I think, to kind of change the question a little bit, one of the ways that we're going to combat that is really, building strong relationships with the community and really working on those relationships and building that trust. I mean, there's no doubt there's been some erosion of trust. When you look nationwide on law enforcement, my job as the chief and the job of all police officers is to build that trust. We have great relationships here in the city of San Diego, and that's why you don't see the big protests. You don't see the marches on the police department whatsoever. And it's because of all those great relationships that we've formed, that I have formed over the last 30 years working in this great city. And so that's what it's about for me. And that's, again, go right back to that whole recruiting and retention thing. And that's why I want to bring in members of the community to work this department, because they will have a vested interest and they'll know more folks. And it's just about building relationships. And we need to do a better job of educating the community on what this job entails. And in fact, this weekend, we're doing it inside the San Diego Police Department. Those are great events to kind of understand what police work is. And some of the things that it's just, we need to do a better job of relating what this job entails and talking about our policies and how we go about our business from a daily basis.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the major issues that's been facing the department in recent years is racial profiling.
Mm-hmm.
First, a series of concerns that were publicized from members of the community from specifically southeastern San Diego, southern San Diego. And that culminated in a study from San Diego State University that had some startling findings and also had some controversy in the way it was released and responded to. A quote you gave to the UT caught my attention. You said, "It comes down to training, it comes down to talking about procedural justice, and it comes down to talking about implicit bias of our officers." That sounds to me like a change in tone and a change in message from the way the department had responded over the last couple years. Should it sound like a change in tone and a change of message?
No. Here's my point. When you look at the San Diego State study, and these are the kind of studies that I'm going to welcome. It's about making us a better San Diego Police Department, about making us better law enforcement professionals. And so, again, that state study was done off of numbers from 2014 and 2015. We have done a lot of training since then. We were doing a lot of training then. Don't take me, we weren't doing training because we were. But we're doing a lot of training, and the whole area is about cultural diversity, implicit bias, non-biased policing, procedural justice. AB 953 comes live here July 1 of this year, and It's something that we're going to be in compliance with day one, but it's something that, there's going to be more fields that are going to be covered. There's going to be more data points that are going to be covered, which is going to give us more variables to really look at how we're doing. I'm very aware of the disparities, especially when it talks about searches. And so some of the variables that we need to look at is to kind of get more into depth of how that came about. And, a lot of those searches were done on Fourth Amendments. So, but we don't know what that community looks like. And so is there really a true disparity? Probable cause was not covered in those searches. So AB 953 is going to do that. But what I want to do, and it comes from the community forums and it comes from just my relationships, people are asking for accountability and transparency in police departments, not just the San Diego Police Department. So we're going to tell our story. I have to give a report to the DOJ every year. So July 1 of 2019, I have to release a report. But I want to tell our story. I'm going to be very transparent about it. I will post it on our webpage. It's just about, if we need to make adjustments, we'll make adjustments. But sometimes it just takes for our officers just to take a slow down, hit the pause button for just a quick minute and explain why we do what we do. Maybe explain what got you here. Hey, you had the tail light out, or hey, you were, somebody called in, say you were driving erratic, or, we got a call of shots fired in this area and we come here and you're here. At times we don't do great on that. So I really want to emphasize to our officers, give that information. Take the extra minute or two to explain your actions, because that goes a long way. It's kind of just like an attaboy. I could walk into a lineup and say, hey, Officer Jones, great job. It's just that extra couple minutes of talking and having that relationship, and then building those relationships, getting out of your car, talking to people. People need to understand why we do what we do.
Yeah, so I think this has been a prominent national conversation. It's been a prominent local conversation, and what I gather from this quote here and from what you just said, basically is that you've been paying attention to that conversation.
Absolutely.
It sounds like you're versed in the language that has been, it's new to a lot of people. I don't presume it was new to you since you've been in law enforcement for 30 years, but the reason it strikes me as a slightly different approach is because, and I would welcome you to correct me if you think this is unfair, but I think that often what the response I heard from the department in recent years was an explanation of why the community's impression that racial profiling was wrong, as opposed to a concern about trying to understand why they felt that way. And this seems to flip that around and to be very interested in why there's a perception of racial profiling is happening, as opposed to very concerned with getting the message out that is not true.
Well, whether it's a real problem or not, you can't fix a problem unless you have a conversation about it. Mm-hmm. And so I want to engage the community about a conversation, because at the end of the day, we're public servants, and the community is our customer. And so I want to be the best service to the community that I can be. And some of that is going to have conversation. And this is a topic that is huge. It's a topic that's nationwide. And so we do need to look at this. And if there's a way that we can improve and improve that perception or improve that reality for folks, then it's my job to make that happen.
Do you think I'm wrong that the department was maybe previously too concerned with dispelling the perception rather than listening to the concerns?
Yeah, I'm not going to get into that. I mean, that's different day.
Sure. We had a showdown a couple of years ago with the district attorney about video footage of an officer shooting in the Midway district around that notorious strip club there. Mm-hmm. And one of the interesting things that came out of that was that the officer was determined to have been justified in that shooting. And the person who died had obvious mental health issues and was accused of sort of brandishing what looked like a knife. One of the interesting things that came out that I've still wanted people to help me grapple with is, even if you decide that the officer should not be criminally held responsible for what happened, it feels like there's a big gulf between that and saying it was the ideal outcome of the encounter. Do you know what I mean? Like that when these two people encounter themselves in this alley, that this is the way it should have come out. Obviously, this man being killed wasn't ideal, right? And yet we're not allowed to have that conversation, it feels like, when it's determined that the officer's shooting was justified. It was justified, and so that's just the way it is. That's the end of that conversation. When in the middle there, obviously there should have been some better outcome than this man dying, unless you do believe that this man should have died in that encounter. And so how can we get to a point where we have a conversation of how this could have gone better, maybe how it wasn't the ideal outcome, or is that just going to cross too many lines to try to have?
Well, here's the thing with most officer-involved shootings, first there's the criminal investigation on that part, and that takes time. It takes time to go through us, and now that we invite the FBI and the U.S. Attorney's Office, it takes time to look at that. But then afterwards, there's generally going to be some type of civil litigation, and so there's really not room for us, the San Diego Police Department, to speak about an open case that's going to be going through civil litigation. That will have to be spoken to in the courts.
So there's no way to admit vulnerability that it could have been better because of the civil and criminal challenge.
I mean, it's always tragic when someone loses their life. I mean, it truly is. And, I've spent several years in the homicide unit, and part of my job was investigating officer-involved shootings. It's never a great outcome when somebody loses their life. When we've had an officer killed recently under my tenure there. And so it's never great, but, civil litigation does come into play.
Mm-hmm.
Ever since I've been in San Diego, there's been a discussion about investing in and getting more time spent on community policing.
Yes.
And it's something that, for fear of lacking nuance here, it seems like it basically just doesn't happen more than it has been in the past. That we're kind of constantly stuck in this situation where we want to do more community policing, but for one reason or another, officers are left to sort of respond to calls as they come in. And then there was some data this summer in a story I put together about the rising response times in the lowest priority calls. Beyond just getting more officers on staff, what can be done to meaningfully change the amount of proactive community-based police work in communities that really revolves more around quality of life concerns
Sure.
rather than safety, public safety?
So a couple things, and I appreciate you bringing this up. So 1991, I mean, that goes back quite a while. I was a 3-year vet of the police department at that time.
I was in first grade.
Okay, perfect. I was one of the original members of the very first neighborhood police team that this department ever stood up in working Logan Heights, Golden Hill, Sherman. That was our area that we were doing that. And I think I did more non-type traditional police work then. I mean, I organized job fairs, community cleanups, paint outs of graffiti. Don't know if we'll get all to that, but I do want to change, and I somewhat disagree with you. We still do a ton of community policing. And when you look at our quarterly community policing report, we go to 1,500 community meetings, problem-solving type of meetings quarterly.
Yeah,
I think it's actually 1,400, somewhere around there, but close.
I guess the metric I was thinking of is when the 5-year plan was passed back in 2012, there was a standard for what the percent of officer time spent on proactive measures would be. And not only have we never met that, we haven't really budged from where we were back when that was passed.
Agreed. And a lot of that just comes to staffing levels. The other part comes to we're dealing with more complex crimes nowadays and more complex issues. Putting somebody in jail takes more time than it used to. That's all taking people out of service, which when you're out of service, you're not available for radio calls. So you're right. Or, unaccounted for time has dropped, and with staffing that will push back up. But I have a couple ideas where I think we can start to do that as we continue to build this department of getting officers out and doing that. And just this past summer, and I even did some of it on overtime, is I had, community night or teen night in the parks, 15 parks from the border all the way up towards North County, where we had officers in every single park. So 15 parks with officers, at least 2 officers in each park for 8 consecutive weeks during the summer. That's community policing to me. That's the youth and officers interacting, playing games, throwing a football, shooting baskets, talking about their job, talking about anything, school. that's what you're going to see, and that's what you've already been seeing in the San Diego Police Department. We are still the model for community policing in this nation. People still send officers out to us and say, how do you do this? This goes back to the late 80s, early 90s, and we're still doing it, and we're going to continue to do it, but you're going to see us increase it.
And I think the concern when those sorts of things are lost is that there will be a lack of trust in just basic relationships between the community and officers, and that could over time translate to either increased criminality or more difficulty in solving crimes. Do you see any of that? The other side of it, the end results.
Well, the trust, that's one of the goals of increasing this, is to improve that trust. You look at the crime rate, we get a lot of information from our community, and that's because of those relationships, and that's what keeps this crime rate so low, and that's why I'm very fortunate to be taking over the department with such historically low crime rates. But yeah, I see what you're saying. I mean, it's, again, part of the job, and I heard this from the forums, was to build that community trust and those community relations, and people want to have relationships with us, and the officers want to have relationships. I can tell you, when officers are allowed to interact, that they enjoy it. It's something that they really want to do. They enjoy it. They feel welcomed, and it's just a great reminder that they're very supported in their community, and that's a great reminder for officers daily.
I got one more question I've been allowed. So on that topic of trust, one of the areas of discussion and dialogue about trust has been the trust you can build with the community of people in San Diego, about 100,000 or more, who are not authorized to be in the United States.
Yes.
And there's been a lot of talk about how do you maintain their trust so that they talk to you and share information, participate, cooperate with you, and yet not endanger their existence in the United States. And so your predecessor has tried to balance that by saying, look, we will not cooperate with federal officials necessarily as deputies of federal enforcement, but they've also been nervous about necessarily calling it a sanctuary city or not cooperating. And what we've also found is it's very hard to say you're not cooperating with immigration enforcement when immigration enforcement can react to all kinds of relatively public information in the law enforcement circles. How can you assure, if you're going to continue that path of assuring them you're not going to enforce immigration law, how can you assure them that you're not going to ensnare them in some sort of immigration enforcement if they do come in contact with San Diego police?
Yeah, and let me be clear, Art, because our policy has been in existence, I want to say, right around 20 years. So when we contact somebody, we do not ask immigration status. That is not going to change under me. I want people to feel very comfortable calling the San Diego Police Department if they're a victim of a crime, irregardless of their status in this country. Also, I want people to feel comfortable if they're stopped, driving a car or walking down the street. That's not going to change. How I'm going to improve that upon is getting out in the community, doing town hall meetings, having, my plan is on a regular basis is going out in the community and having meetings and advertising that, Chief Nisleit will be out wherever it's going to be. Come and say hello, and I'll answer tough questions, and some of those will be those questions. I wanted to make it very clear. I'm not concerned about that unless you're out there committing serious, violent crimes against our community. Then I will be concerned about that. But we're just going to, hopefully apprehend you. That's not my deal. That's immigration's deal. So nothing is going to change on that. We're still going to be signing U visas like we have previously. I will continue that also. And so I just want the community to feel very comfortable with the San Diego Police Department. I'll be out there sending that message out all the time. And so will my officers, so will the captains of the commands. It's something I did as a captain of Mid-City Division, the most diverse community that we have, was go out to meetings all the time. I went to school PTAs with mainly Spanish-speaking communities to tell them, when you're stopped by a police officer, don't worry. We're not going to turn you over to immigration. That's not what we're doing here. Our job is to keep you safe.
Assistant Chief Dave Nisleit, thank you for coming in, and congrats and good luck in your confirmation.
Thank you so much.
The Voice of San Diego podcast is part of the Voice of San Diego podcast network. Visit voiceofsandiego.org/podcast to learn more about the Cura Chaos show about movers and shakers on both sides of the border, Beer Talk Radio, our business shows Startup Vault and I Made It in San Diego, and the rest of the shows in the network. If you like the show, go to voiceofsandiego.org and click the donate button. Or if you'd like to sponsor it, contact me at kinsey@vosd.org. That's KINSEE@vosd.org.